I've changed my mind. What a statement, right? I'm going to get a tattoo that says it right here, because I think it's funny. It's what people say when they're thinking about a tattoo. What if I change my mind? But I also want to get that tattoo because I have, in fact, changed mine. My name is Matt Willey. I'm an artist and the founder of The Good of the Hive, a global art project, adventure, and organization based in my personal commitment to hand paint 50,000 individual honeybees in murals around the world. The mission is to get people curious about the planet we live on through the lens of art, bees, and storytelling. And my vision, if all goes as planned, is a world filled with people that see and experience the connectedness of all things. The bee is the only creature I know of that we keep, but she remains wild. She's the perfect bridge between humans and nature. She's truly everyone's. She's not bound by gender, race, nationality, or political affiliation. None of the things that separate us. And her job, pollination, is the spark of change that makes human life possible. Now, before I tell you about my work, I want to share with you a little bit about my experience with change. We all have these epiphanies that it's time for a change. But our success in achieving those changes has everything to do with our experiences leading up to that realization. Have we prepared enough for those moments to seize them? I've had to change to survive in my own life. And I've also had to change at times just to be happy. In 2008, a little honeybee flew in and landed on the floor in my studio. And my life changed. But the change didn't begin there with her. It began years earlier when I was 17 and had decided to become an artist. I was on an art school trip with my class to London, and I was sitting in Hyde Park, feverishly trying to draw a tree. And my teacher came up to me and she explained to me the idea of negative space. She told me that the space around the tree was as important in the creation of the tree as the tree itself. This blew my little 17-year-old mind. In that moment, I had gone from wanting to be an artist to feeling like one and seeing like one. And I would never see the world the same again. The next example is when I was 23, and I had just graduated from a prestigious art school, so I got right to work waiting on tables. You know, I was trying to paint during the day and wait tables at night, and I was having very little success. I just wasn't getting my paintings made. So one night when I was at the restaurant, I just had this flash. It was like this epiphany that I had gotten really, really old, like 40. And I had never made my paintings. You know, and this terrified me. So I walked out. I actually quit my job. And I went out and I started putting up those flyers, you know, the ones with before the internet, where you used to put your phone number and your name at the bottom. People would tear them off. And they said things like, I'll teach your kid to paint. I'll paint your hallway ceiling to look like the Sistine Chapel. I'll paint a portrait of your child, anything with paint. And I put these up all over Washington, D.C. for like a week. And finally, one woman called me and she said, I can't go anywhere without seeing these flyers. I need to meet this kid. And so I go over to her house, bring my portfolio, and I go in and I show her, and we have a conversation about 5 minutes, and she says, okay, follow me. And we go down some stairs, around a corner, down some more stairs, down this long hallway to the back of the basement. And she just shows me these moldings and says, paint them. I hate these moldings. We'll try you out here. You know, in the humility of the back of someone's basement, even with this art school education, that project began a 27-year career painting murals that continues today. My third example is where I get a little more vulnerable. I'm a big Brené Brown fan, and so I actually get vulnerable so often lately that I coined a word. I vulnerabate. I vulnerabate like 3 times a day lately. It's like I'm a teenager again, you know? Like I'm the shame and it's excruciating, the embarrassment, but I just can't stop exploring these parts of myself. So I coined a word, and it's a verb, to actively and willingly engage in the excruciating process of being vulnerable rather than run away from, eat, drink, have sex at, or create diversions in order to avoid having people see the real me. I'm an alcoholic with 20 years of continuous recovery. And telling you all that makes me feel extremely vulnerable. But I couldn't do a talk about change without sharing with you the most profound change of my own life. When I got sober and bottomed out, I was 25 pounds lighter than I am today. I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror, and I was terrified. At some point, I got out of bed and took my dogs to the park. It was the evening, and it was February, and I just remember being freezing cold. And as I was standing there, I thought, how did I get here? You know, I just couldn't get warm, and I had tried to stop drinking hundreds of times before with no success. What was going to be different this time? I wanted it again, but I had no reason to trust that I could change. And one thing was different about that day and that moment. I just said 2 words out loud in that park. Help me. Help me. And in that moment, I don't know where it came from, but I felt a warm blanket being wrapped around me. I was instantly warm. And the park that had been really dark and dim and gray was suddenly illuminated. There were literally lights in the trees that I can't explain, and the ground was shimmering. And there was this incredible feeling of something in between, like in that negative space, there was something there supporting me. And I felt my mind change with that action. I knew I was going to have a lot of work to do, you know, to stay sober. I had no idea how, but I knew in that moment that I had become willing, that I had suddenly understood myself in relation to something greater than me. And, you know, a tree or a bee they're wired to understand change and adapt as things happen. We're not. We have to learn it. We're wired for choice, not change. So fast forward, it's 2008, and I'm in my studio in New York City, and a little honeybee flies in and lands in the middle of the rug. And I literally am like curious about this little bug. So I get down on the floor with her and I hang out with her for like 2.5 hours. I got my magnifying glass and I noticed she was like a minuscule puppy to me, more like an animal than a bug. I thought it was fascinating that I'd never noticed these bugs before. And they'd been around me my whole life. I thought, what else has been around me my whole life that I've never noticed? And she was walking along the floor, so for 2 hours, and I was there with her, and I even heard this voice that said, this is just about change, another form of change. I didn't even really know what that meant at the time, but after a couple of hours and connecting with this bee, I put her out in the backyard, and I came back in, and I started researching honeybees. And I came across colony collapse disorder, which was a huge mystery back then. Millions of bees were dying all over the world, and no one knew why. And I thought, I'm in the middle of New York City. How have I heard nothing about this? And so I researched further, and I came across a behavior of the bee called altruistic suicide, or altruistic self-removal from the hive. And this is if a bee feels sick and it's in the hive, it will exit and fly off into the abyss for the good of the hive. This is where the name of my organization would come from years later. But they do this, they take this drastic action because they're hardwired to understand that their immune system is collective. It's not based on the individual bee's body, it's based on the health of the hive. And this was like a lightning bolt moment for me, years before a pandemic would teach us this exact same thing. Our immune system is collective, but we don't act like it. We choose not to. So fast forward another bunch of years, maybe 7, and someone sends me, a friend of mine sends me a video of the side of a honey company in LaBelle, Florida, and says, you know what, Matt, Willey, you should paint bees on this building. And I'd been wanting to do one mural to raise some awareness. And so I just called up this company, and I said, would you guys like a mural? And they said, we would love a mural. We have no money to pay you. The people of the town have no money, and murals are illegal in our city. So I was like, okay, I'm getting way too old to run from the cops, so if you guys get the law changed, I'll figure out a way to do it. And we had a nice conversation. I hung up the phone thinking there's no way they're ever going to call me back, right? And 2 months later, they called me up and said, we got the law changed. When are you coming? And I had moved to Asheville, North Carolina at that point, and so I put up, my flyer 2.0. It was online this time. It was just a web page saying, talking about the project I wanted to do, and I called it The Good of the Hive. And I raised about $500 from friends and family and clients, and I hopped in my rusty Ford Ranger and headed off to LaBelle on faith. And when I got there, some amazing things happened. Someone put me up in their RV for free for 10 weeks. The restaurants and coffee shops in town wouldn't let me pay for a cup of coffee or food. They were giving me free salad bar. I'd show up at the mural site and there would be a jar of honey from a local beekeeper with a Post-it note saying, sell this to help raise money for your project. And someone wrote an article, a little one, in a local paper, and somehow it hit Facebook or something, and people started donating from all over the country. Even other honey companies, seeming competitors, were donating for me to paint bees on this wall. Something was happening. This mural that had started out being about raising awareness about bees was becoming about human connection. So on that project, they made the mural site a water stop on one of those rides for hungry kids going across Florida. And on that day, one of the producers of that ride came walking up to me with a honeybee perched on his shoulder. And he said, this bee's telling me to come and talk to you. And I was like, really, what's the bee saying? And we got into a conversation. And he asked me how many bees were in a healthy hive. And I literally just learned the day before 30 to 60,000. So I told him. And he said to me, just looked at me and said, do you think you could paint 50,000 of them? There were 16 bees in that first mural. But it was the second lightning bolt moment for me. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to see if I can do it. That was almost 30 murals ago, over 5,500 bees. I have painted from LaBelle to Nebraska to Southern California to Manhattan to Smithsonian, the National Zoo. And I just completed my first international mural in the UK just a week and a half ago. We are a messy, beautiful species. We've been getting ourselves into predicaments since we started walking upright. But through all of it, whether it's pollination issues, climate change, systemic racism, addiction, depression, it isn't really about what's happening at the time. It's about whether we feel alone or not in the process of going through it. Do we perceive ourselves as separate from others? You know, there's two things that the honeybee symbolizes that all humans crave: a sense of purpose about our existence, and the hive, the connectedness to each other. I believe all healing begins with that sense of purpose and connection. You know, whether we're talking about a bee, a tree, a drop of water in the ocean, or the drop of fossil fuel we need to leave in the ground, it's all us. The separation from any of it is an illusion. Everything about the good of the hive is an echo of that moment I had with that bee on the floor. I had unknowingly prepared myself for something when she landed there. I had been working for years to change the only thing that I have any control over, me. But maybe more importantly, when I was faced with some of those moments where I had a choice, I let myself be changed. Thank you.